So which one are you choosing? If you're thinking about, is this the right time to buy or should I be waiting? This whole conversation is going to be about, is it the right time to rent or should I be trying to own a property? So if you're currently a renter, like I said, this video is for you. If you're not a renter, you might want to stick around and just make sure that you don't have anything else to add on to this. And if you might want to just share this to somebody who you know is renting who wants to buy a property, because I'm going to go through and break down the differences between renting and owning it, and are there benefits? Does one outweigh the other, and what makes most sense for you? If you don't know who I am, my name is Christian Stubbs. I'm a team leader here at Onyx Homes, where we help people who are looking to make a move in Southern California. So if that's you, hit us up. But let's dive right into the rent versus own conversation. So let's start by breaking down some of the benefits of both renting and owning. And a lot of the times this conversation gets watered down. I'm not going to look at this so much from a realtor's perspective. The only time I'm going to put my realtor hat on here is to share with you the most common questions that I get from each, misconceptions and things like that. I'm going to take an absolutely unbiased opinion because buying is not the right thing for everybody. So the benefits of renting, let's start there. Number one, first and foremost, is flexibility. You have way more flexibility as a renter than you do as a buyer. Number two is that renting has a obviously much lower barrier to entry. It is a lot easier to get yourself into a rental agreement, move into a house, than it is to purchase something. And probably one of the biggest things that I hear from most people, and this is me putting my realtor hat on, is that they're renting because they don't want to deal with major expenses or maintenance and they just want something that's easy. Okay, so those are the three top benefits of being a renter. So what are the top few benefits of being a homeowner? Well, the first one is probably the biggest, is the potential to build equity. And I say potential here because there is risk involved, but this is definitely the number one thing. If you're talking to somebody that is a homeowner and they're proponent of being a homeowner, they're probably going to talk about the wealth that you can build through real estate. Number two is something most people don't ever talk about and maybe not really understand, are the tax benefits of owning real estate are huge. Now, this is another one that is often overlooked, but this is that your costs are relatively fixed when you own a property, and when you rent a property, they will pretty much go up forever. And last but not least, when you own a property, obviously you can make it your own. You can do way more to a house that you own versus something you're renting. So if that's really important to you, that might fall into this. And that is a really important thing for a lot of different people. There are definitely more benefits to each buying and renting, but I want to make sure that we really understand that a lot of the benefits of renting are usually a negative of home ownership. Think about flexibility as a huge bonus for renting, but stability is really a big thing for owning a home. So if you're renting and you like the flexibility, the reality is your landlord might choose to sell that property or not renew your lease, and you might have to move when you might not want to, versus when you own a home, you have that stability, knowing your payments staying the same. You don't have to move anywhere if you don't want to, but it's a heck of a lot more complicated to move when you own a home than if you're renting. So a lot of these things are kind of give and take, and obviously you can't get the best of both worlds, so you have to choose what works best for you. I'm not going to go through and go over a surface level overview of pros and cons of renting versus buying. I really want to go through whether you're renting or you're buying. I want to make sure that you understand you're making a choice to do so. And at the end of this video, if you stick around, I'm going to share with you a bonus that I've been working on. I put a tremendous amount of time in. So stick around to the end to make sure you hear about that. But let's talk about renting as a choice. Now, this is something that you're not going to hear a lot of realtors say, especially because we only make money if somebody actually purchases or closes on a transaction, obviously, or sells a property. So why am I going through and saying this? The reason is there's a couple different categories of renters that I have identified, and I really want to make sure that you are choosing to rent if you're renting. And for whatever reason, there seems to be some negative connotations with renting, and I don't think there's anything wrong at all with it. So there are a lot of different reasons why somebody might choose to be renting as opposed to purchasing. As a real estate agent myself and running a team, we talk to a ton of people who are in this exact situation, and this is probably what I hear the most when someone would choose to rent versus own, is in your more expensive areas, which Orange County, anywhere in Southern California, certainly falls under this category, is in areas that are more expensive, your rent payments are way more affordable than it would be if you were trying to buy that same property. So a house that you might rent for, let's say, $5,000 a month is probably going to cost you $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, or $9,000 a month if you were to mortgage that property and buy it. So what usually ends up happening is we as humans figure out what is our budget for housing, because housing is an expense that everybody has to have regardless if you choose to rent or choose to buy. And a lot of the times people will say, let's use that $6,000 payment range. range. Is they're comfortable spending that $6,000 a month, whether it's on rent or on a mortgage. So when you look at what you can afford for $6,000 a month on rent and look at that, what it would be if you were to buy something, oftentimes people will look at this and say, well, this is a heck of a lot nicer house, or it's in a nicer neighborhood. That's what I'm gonna go ahead and go with. And that is what's gonna keep them renting because they like what they can afford there. And what we see oftentimes is, especially with first-time homebuyers, is they're typically going to sacrifice a little bit on what they can actually get into so that they can get the benefits of home ownership. And the only way that really happens is if they look at the benefits and they see that you have your tax benefits, you have your appreciation, you have all kinds of different things that we mentioned earlier. When you buy a property, that house might just not be as nice as if you were to be renting. Now that's assuming that everyone's on the same playing field with saying, hey, I'll spend $6,000 a month on rent, or I'll spend $6,000 a month on my mortgage. Now there are definitely people out there who are renting below their means, which is absolutely the best thing to do. And then when you go and purchase something, you're actually spending more money to get something more comparable. And that is because, again, they see the benefits. But there's a lot of people who don't necessarily care about the benefits, or they might be renting for a whole nother reason. For example, if you're moving to a new area and you're not really sure where you want to live, it would almost be silly just to buy something, especially if you were in a rush. So sometimes it'll make sense to go in and rent a property for 6 months to a year, feel out the area, and then make your purchase, or even then decide if you want to keep renting, great. If you're looking to move often, if you want to live in one area and switch up to another one every year, every couple of years, that might be a situation where renting makes more sense. Now, like I've said before, I really want to make sure that if you are renting, it is by choice and it's not by default. So let's talk about choosing to buy. And even if you are renting and you have your heart set on continuing to rent, you have to understand what is the opportunity cost, meaning what you're missing out on of owning a property. So when you own a property, there is so much that goes into this, but I'm going to cover a couple of different things. I want to break down what is actually included in your mortgage payment. So after you've bought the property, you have your payment that you're going to have just as if you're renting, you have your rent payment. Rent obviously goes to you're really buying the time that you're staying in that house, versus a mortgage payment is very different. So in a mortgage payment, you're going to hear this acronym called PITIA. We'll put it up on the screen here, and we'll kind of break down what each one of these means. And some of them have benefits, and some of them really are just there because there's obviously cost to home ownership. So let's go in order and first explain what they are, and then I'll go into more detail about the benefits if there are any. So the first one, P, is principal. Now this is your principal towards your loan balance. So your actual mortgage payment is made up of just the P and the I being interest. So your principal and interest payment is your actual mortgage. Now all of these other letters in this acronym are all clumped together in the same payment, usually, cover that in another video, but your actual mortgage is really only the principal and interest. Next in line is taxes. T stands for taxes. You have property taxes when you purchase a property in California. The last two are IA. This is your insurance and association if you have one. So PITIA stands for principal, interest, tax, insurance, and association. These are all the things that are going to make up that monthly payment, which really everybody refers to as the mortgage, but a lot of it actually isn't the mortgage payment. So your principal and interest, let's break down this portion first. So your principal is like money going into the piggy bank. This is you paying down your loan balance. The lower your loan balance goes, the more equity you're going to gain. Now let's do a quick definition of equity if you're not familiar. It is your home's value minus whatever you owe on the loan. So if you have $1 million home and you have a $700,000 loan, that would give you $300,000 in equity. So every time you make that mortgage payment, you are paying down that principal balance so that you are gaining equity on your house. That's assuming your house does not change in value. If it goes up or down, that could change, but again, I'll talk about that in another video. The next portion is your interest. So this is the interest that the bank is collecting because they're lending you the money to buy the house. So this is going to be a large portion of your principal and interest, especially in the beginning, you're mostly paying interest. The benefit here, and yes, there is a benefit in paying interest, is your interest on your primary residence is tax deductible. Now, if you are thinking about buying a property in Orange County, I can assure you that you do need a tax write-off. Even though I'm not an accountant, I can say pretty confidently that if you're buying a home in Orange County, you're probably making enough money to where a tax write-off wouldn't be a bad thing. Call your accountant anytime you're spending a lot of money. There's my disclaimer. So what you're gonna want to understand is that when you're writing off your interest paid to the bank, that is something that is gonna lower your taxable income. And if you're at a normal W-2 job, you'll probably get a bigger tax return at the end of the year. And you can put that back into the property, you can save that for a vacation, do whatever you want with it. But there is a huge savings on taxes when you own a property. Now that segues right into taxes for property taxes, not income tax, property tax. So this is an expense. Every property in California has at least a 1% property tax rate. There are other fees that can be added on here, but for argument's sake, let's just say every house has a 1% property tax. So you're gonna have to factor that into your payment as well too. Next is your insurance and then association. So your insurance is gonna be the insurance on the actual house itself. This is your homeowner's insurance. So this is to protect against the big major things. Think of if you bought a property and you had a major kitchen leak or something like that, you have insurance to protect you from those types of things. There are other insurances you can add like earthquake and flood, other things, but for the most part, homeowner's insurance by itself. The last one is association. So if you're buying a property in a homeowner's association, this is an additional expense you would have as well too. This is obviously going to totally depend on where you buy and what's included, so I won't really go into too much about that here. So at the end of this is your whole payment on the property. This is really your cost of holding it. So when you're looking at this, you want to break down where are the benefits, what are the benefits of home ownership. You have principal pay down, so every month you're making that mortgage payment, you're paying down the principal. Number two is you have a tax write-off with the interest. Number three is you can probably write off your property tax as well too. Again, you'll have to defer to your accountant there. And the lastly is your appreciation on the property. So the value of this home, if you look historically, let's take out what we think is going to happen in the short term with housing over the next handful of years. If you look back to forever ago, real estate has always gone up if you look at it over a long enough time frame. And the average that homes appreciate, including the '08 crash and all the other market crashes, properties go up 5% every year. That is the average. So if you look at buying a property now, do the math on what happens 10 years from now if it were to go up 5% every single year. Even for the people that bought at the worst possible time ever in 2008, right before the crash, the very, very last person that purchased, if they still own that home and if they haven't refinanced, they have a mortgage that's almost completely paid off and their home is worth double what it paid for. And they bought at the worst time ever. So there's a saying in real estate, and I think it's fitting for what I just said, is that time in the market beats timing the market every time. The longer you're planning on living in a home, the more it makes sense to buy. Now, again, if you're renting and you're moving around, then it might not make sense to buy at all. But that's your decision based on what you're looking to do with your life. So here's what I've learned as a real estate agent talking to a ton of different people who are in this rent versus own decision, is there's three categories of renters in my opinion. The first category is that they have a personal reason why they're renting. I mentioned somebody that's moving to a new area, somebody that knows they're going to get relocated for work, or they have some sort of a reason why they should not buy a property and it does not make sense. That's number one. And category number one is the smallest of all of these groups. Category number two is typically the group that says, I am saving up for, I'm waiting. They're really waiting for something to happen. In my experience, this is the second largest group. And this is, they're usually one or two conversations away from realizing, hey, wait a second, maybe I could do this sooner than I thought. So my advice is if you're finding yourself in here and you're telling yourself, I'm saving for down payment, I'm waiting for prices to change, I'm waiting for rates to change, I would make absolute certain that you know all the different facts about, one, the benefits of home ownership, but I'd also make sure you look at timing the market. Is that what we're trying to do? So that you're making a conscious decision. A lot of the times people here in categories 2, and you'll see again in category 3, they're not necessarily making a decision to rent, they're just waiting on the decision to buy. So make sure here, if you're choosing to rent, there's nothing wrong with it, but you at least understand all the things that you're trading off when choosing not to buy. All right, now category number 3 is these are the renters by default. Like I mentioned in the very beginning of the video, there is a really low barrier to entry to rent a property. Anybody can qualify to rent something, and not everybody can qualify to actually purchase a property. So these are the people who haven't even explored home ownership. They're probably not listening to this because they're not listening to real estate agents talk, but these are the people who, with a couple of different conversations and some planning, they might be able to become a homeowner even when they thought it was impossible. This is the biggest category, in my opinion, is people who who just really haven't considered, should I buy a home as opposed to paying rent? And again, when you look at this over a very long period of time, if you're gonna rent for the next 50 years versus own for the next 50 years, make sure that you're making that decision. Because when it comes to buying a property, the best time to buy was 10 years ago, and the next best time, not necessarily is today, but is sooner. Because 10 years from now, I don't think we're gonna be saying, gosh, I wish I didn't buy a property. The reality is, it just matters on making the situation make sense for you. Everybody has their own unique situation, and you have to make sure it's right for you. So I mentioned I had a bonus at the end, and here it is. Thank you for sticking around. If you have, make sure you like this video, and if you haven't already, share this with somebody who is thinking about renting or owning and they're really not sure. But this next part I'm gonna share with you, our bonus, is something I've spent a ton of time on. This goes way more in depth than this video. If I was filming this one, it'd probably be 2-hour long video, and it took me about 10 or 15 hours just to write out the text here. So what we put together is a rent versus own guide. If you are interested in this, go to the URL on the screen. We're gonna have a link down in the description down below. And if you can't find it anywhere, reach out to us, DM, Facebook, whatever, you can find us. This is something that's gonna be a extremely comprehensive guide. There will be a lot of text, just like in our email newsletter. It'll go way more in depth than we will here, but there are also gonna be videos that are a lot more raw and just me going through and talking about the different things. It's also gonna set up our renter strategy session. So if you are renting and you're thinking, should I have a conversation about what buying looks like? You can set that up with one of our local experts as well too. As always, you wanna make sure it makes sense for your situation. So if you feel like you should share this with somebody, or if you should go to that website or click the link down below, I'd highly recommend doing it. I hope you found this valuable. If you have any other comments, always shoot it over to us. Topics you wanna hear, let us know. All right, my name is Christian. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.